Hi and welcome to Housing Data Talks. Today's podcast is all about ASB. It's something that there's a lot of emotion around, there's a lot of legislation around, and there's a lot of confusion around. So today we'll be covering everything from ASB definitions, what people use as terminology for ASB, some experiences, and also things on case recording and the new Crime and Policing Act. I'm joined today by Harvinder Saimbhi from ASB Help, who is the CEO, and she's got a wealth of experience, over 25 years, well actually she tells me 34 years in the industry on it, and also John Wickenden, yes he's back again for another episode, and he'll be sharing his knowledge and experience with the data side of things, ASB and everything else related to that. So I hope you enjoy this one. Hi Harvey, and it's great to meet you. Can you just give us a bit of a background of what you've come from, what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. My background has been in housing, local authority. So I started my career as a housing officer initially, and from there on I kind of got various other roles in terms of housing manager, went into community safety, did a lot of different roles within that, and then obviously got engaged in the world of ASB and managed the multi-agency service there. Again, CCTV provision and hate crime. So a really rounded up approach in terms of tackling issues around in housing and also in community safety.
So you've seen a lot of
Absolutely.
ASB, so it's it's over 25 years, isn't it?
That you've been 34 years actually.
Wow.
In the field of antisocial behaviour.
So really are a specialist, and you've had a lifetime achievement
yes, I did.
acknowledgement as well, haven't you, for it as well?
To developing services around antisocial behaviour and community safety and hate crime.
Okay,
yeah.
So today we're going to touch on, obviously ASB is a specialist subject, and we'll be speaking to John as well about his views and a little bit of data behind the numbers as well. So I just wanted to first kind of get on to the statistics that came out, I think it was last year. 37% of people in England and Wales have experienced ASB or witnessed it themselves, which roughly, when I had a look at the numbers, it was about, that's about 25 million people in the country. Now, we tend to find that the data shows us, and I don't know if you want to talk to this a bit, John, we sort of have said between 5 and 7 new ASB cases per 1,000 properties for what our customers is what we say is sort of good level of recording. But obviously the recording has fluctuated over the years. So what are your views on how ASB cases are recorded, what people are maybe doing right and wrong? Any tips and suggestions? So a bit of an open one to both of you there on that.
Okay.
Well, we first started collecting antisocial behaviour case data about 20 years ago. It was all part of the respect agenda, give respect, get respect. And we started from scratch. We didn't really know what was normal, what was going to be recorded. We had to create our own definitions of what antisocial behaviour was. We kind of had a few bits of legislation. It was obviously before the 2014 Act. And what we found was a sort of normal caseload was about 70 cases per 1,000 properties per year. And it stayed like that for 7 or 8 years of collecting ASB. There was a constant median, so you knew that noise was going to be the most complained about issue, and you knew that new caseloads were going to be about 70 cases per 1,000 properties per year. And then suddenly, after the 2010 election, I think the focus on ASB just dropped away alongside lots of other regulation for social landlords. And the number of cases recorded also dropped away. And then after the 2014 Act, it dropped away even further. So by the time we got to around the end of the 2010s, we were looking at case rates of around 35 cases per 1,000 properties. And that's kind of where we are now. But I was thinking, there's still a lot of antisocial behaviour. We still know that antisocial behaviour is occurring. We still know that people are suffering from it. It's endemic within our society as well as social housing. Where have those cases gone? What's happening to those people? Why is it not being reported to social landlords? So we've been trying to investigate that and trying to find out from talking to our members about where they're not recording ASB, where they used to. And it does seem there is this kind of divide between collecting low-level antisocial behaviour and saying, well, that doesn't count, that's like, I don't know, good neighbour or something like that. And it's only the severe cases that sort of border on criminality or serious harm that are actually being recorded by landlords. Whereas in the past, 15, 20 years ago, it was all recorded, and it was all really important to make sure that if somebody was suffering from antisocial noise, for example, or neighbour nuisance, that it was recorded and dealt with and it stopped occurring. But I don't really know how we can get to a position where we can go back in time and start recording that information again. So I'm just sort of hoping that we can find something in our discussions today.
Harvey, what are your views on what John said there as well?
Okay. I think in terms of recording antisocial behaviour, if I talk from a national perspective, it's different across the board. We know that the British Crime Survey highlighted that over 1 million incidents were reported to the police. But we know that's just the tip of the iceberg. We know that housing authorities, landlords, local authorities also have a lot of data. And unfortunately, there isn't a central database from the government which makes it mandatory for everyone to report their instances of antisocial behaviour. I know that the Crime and Policing Act is sort of working towards data collection. I think there's that perspective, but also in terms of talking about antisocial behaviour in a housing context, it all depends on how those are recorded. In some areas, some people report antisocial behaviour through a 101 number, and in other areas, it's the local authority that will record that data. So I think there is a kind of a different approach across all authorities. So it's difficult to really pinpoint exactly where that data is recorded and collected. And I think, going back to your point around what type of antisocial behaviour is recorded, fundamentally, I'd say that antisocial behaviour is not low level. So anyone making a report, if it's classed as antisocial behaviour, there should be proper data recording systems in place, and it should be mandatory to report them into a central base.
Yeah, I think it would make such a difference, as you say, if there was a central base and you could get so much more information from that. And it's really interesting when you talk about definitions. And from what we've seen, and we did a short piece and we were looking at the data that Scotland collect. And like we said, there's no more antisocial behaviour in Scotland, but they just seem to have such a better grasp on it. And I think it's their definition is so much more clear and more defined compared to what we work with in England. And that makes a real difference, doesn't it, from what's happening, what's recorded. And as John said, what's noise nuisance, what's good neighbour issues, what's, you know, the kids making noise, kicking the football in the street, what's the summer barbecue that's gone on but it's only happened once. What's the real definition there of what should be recorded and what shouldn't?
Yeah. I think you could make a good point about the ASB definition. We know it's really broad. We know it's also subjective. We also know it's inconsistent. And that's inconsistent across the way agencies use it. So that leads to confusion. It leads to mismanaged cases in terms of antisocial social behaviour cases. So I think it's really important that we don't just look at the definition. It's also, some areas outline type of antisocial behaviour. So it will be noise, kids playing, verbal abuse. But what we've really got to get away from is the harm that antisocial behaviour is causing. So it's really about sort of picking up that element rather than just looking at a list of type of actions. As we said, you know, it is very subjective. Something that I might find as antisocial, John may not, you may not, you know. So I think it's very much looking at the impact that behaviour is having on those individuals. And that's backed with good case management, good strategies, good policies, which housing officers understand, you know, on the basis that, you know, you've got an antisocial behaviour case. So it's very early on identifying, is it antisocial behaviour? What type of issue is it? What are the vulnerability risks? What impact is it having on that individual? So I think if it's driven, you know, from that perspective, the definition, you know, is there to assist. So the ASB Crime and Policing Act 2014, the definition is very much antisocial behaviour that is likely to cause or causes harassment, alarm or distress. And in a housing context, it's nuisance or annoyance. And then you've got the bigger one around detrimental impact on the quality of life. So you can see that alone is so broad.
Yeah.
So so I think that there is a lot of work to be done in terms of really, in the frontline officers really understanding that, and the policies and practices and case management reflect that.
No, definitely. And I think so many similarities of what you say, and people have, all organisations have policies and they have procedures that you look at, and you have people with experience and you can say this is what we believe. But from my experience, even working as in a team of housing officers, you've got your own perception, as you say. So what I might sort of think of when it comes to antisocial behaviour, what I might have a report, a colleague of mine might sort of say, well, in my experience, that's not, or even just the geographical areas and patch sizes for housing officers or specialist officers, they're usually so wide ranging, and you've got an area where people don't report it because that's just how it is, that's how they've always been, you don't report it. But you've got maybe a rural area or a new build where people have suddenly moved to somewhere and they've gone, well, this isn't acceptable, I'm not happy about that. And then I wonder if some officers get stuck in the habit of, well, that's not what I think, rather than going, well, actually, if we go back to the bare bones of it, as you said, it's causing annoyance, it's causing distress. What that actually does mean, is it ASB or is it kind of got a little bit, for want of a better term, stagnated, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of research done, in the sense of why do people not report antisocial behaviour? So in some people in a particular area may report incidents of antisocial behaviour but feel that they've not had the service, no one's responded to them, no one's taken up their issue, nobody's called them back, or it's goes that this happens on the estate, so it's just the way things are, that broken window scenario, that's just what happens. So I think this is where I go back to the impact and the harm, and it's really important to really take on each incident, each complaint. And it's very much in the early action. It's determining it very early on, the impact. So if you've got a case, you've been given a case, it's very much about, what am I dealing with? What is the vulnerability here? What is the risk that I'm dealing with? It's got to be victim centred. They've got to be communicated to, and really, a clear pathway in terms of what will happen to their report. And then it's around, even though somebody complains about antisocial behaviour, it's really important the way that is investigated, how that's then how you're speaking to partnerships, because sometimes you might not know all the information, but the police might have a range of incidences that have been reported. So it's very much around kind of partnership perspective, risk-led, victim-orientated, good case management. I think that's really important to really kind of that clear message, really, because if you've done that early on, it's going to make things easier for yourself. And I do feel for housing officers, because they've got such a large, massive role. You've got rent arrears, you've got housing repairs to deal with, you've got community cohesion stuff now, and you're picking up all the medical issues that the victims will tell you, that the tenants will tell you. Then it's that, where do you kind of draw that line? And I think the role of maybe a lot of housing practitioners has now kind of changed to community safety practitioners, because it's such a broad area.
No, definitely. Yeah. And I think it reminds me of consultancy piece that we looked at, John, and it was for an organisation, and it was interesting the period of time they'd leave cases open for, and then you'd have multiple reports that were new cases, but actually it should have been against one case. And we found that there was, you might have to remind me of whether they were underreporting or overreporting. Was it underreporting?
It's underreporting, yeah.
But they seemed to have so much information for it, but there was still this sort of confusion, for want of a better term, wasn't it, for what we had to look at there, and what we could kind of help with going forward as well.
Yeah, so there were lots of incidents of what I would think of as antisocial behaviour, and I felt quite sad, like reading like all these reports about people like being harassed, and people with like neighbours that's like smoking drugs or taking drugs or having fights, and having to live with that going on outside your door, and the landlord sort of, for whatever reason, didn't feel in a position to help these people. It was just, that's kind of just what happens in social housing, and I I don't know, it just made me feel a bit sort of depressed about the whole situation, like looking at case after case where this was happening, and just seeing that the landlord couldn't or wouldn't, or certainly wasn't going to take any action. And it's just like, how can we turn that around? How can we give these tenants kind of belief that their landlord is going to do something, so that they report it and then see action being taken and actually see a stop to the antisocial behaviour that's occurring?
You know, in terms of our charity, we do get a lot of those type of calls, you know, on the basis that, you know, I've been working with my local authority or my housing provider, and I'm really frustrated and really frightened, and I keep reporting it, but no one comes back to me. I don't know what's happening with my case, and I don't know what to do. And interestingly, you know, there are tools, there is legislation under the ASB Crime and Policing Act, the ASB Case Review, where individuals, when they continue to report and they think more can be done with their case, they have that statutory right to report and ask for an ASB case review. But what we find when we go back and speak to their landlords is that sometimes a lot of the background work is being done. You know, the housing officer is speaking to the police, they are speaking to the neighbours, they are collecting all the information and the evidence, they are looking at CCTV, but all that takes time. And what the biggest lesson is that they've not communicated that to the victim. They've not told them that, you know, we've got this, you continue reporting it, tell us about the incidences, tell us about what's happening, tell us about the impact that is having, what that behaviour is having on you. So I think this is where the kind of communication is so important. You know, good case management equals good communication. And so I think that's what we find on a national level again and again, you know, where victims aren't informed. And I think it's like you and I, if we report something, we want to know whether something will be done. And if something isn't able to be done, then I want to know that too. So I think they have a right to really know what the situation is and how and what their rights are. Because I think sometimes victims don't know what their rights are. And sometimes they don't even know who to report it to. They'll either go to the police will say go to the local authority, local authority will go to the police. And unfortunately, all the years later of having worked in the field for so long, all of us, that we still have that silo working or referral, you know, from one agency to the other. So I think this is where, you know, partnership working is so important. We know that ASB cases are complex, you know, they're so complex, they're not straightforward. And no housing officer should think it's their sole responsibility to sort everything out. You know, it's about them getting that assistance and that help to do a really thorough piece of work, you know, to really treat them like your grandma. If she was reporting an incident, what would you do? You'd pull all stops out, wouldn't you? And it's the similar approach to that. I get the pressures of work. But I think in the world of housing, and when you're tackling ASB, it can be really, really complex. You know, you've got individuals who are frightened in their home, they can't walk to the local shop, they can't leave the front door, they can't hang their clothes out in the garden, you know, and they're frightened to put the bins out. So I think sometimes people say, well, it's just a neighbour dispute. You know, if it's personal and it's targeted and that individual's, it's creating great harm on that individual, then it's not just a neighbour dispute, something needs to be done.
No, I wonder as well with what we've spoken about and the little frustrations that people get. And as you say, for example, you've got cases where when I've dealt with as a neighbourhood officer, you've got, say, a block of flats or people living close by. One person's using cannabis, which, you know, it's in the tenancy agreement. You can't do that. It's illegal. Obviously, it's a legal matter because it's a policing matter. It's a drug. And then you've got this conflict of you speak to your housing and they deal with it as far as they can, but also I sometimes think it was always a stop of, but it's also a police matter. But then the police are so stretched. So you're kind of in this catch-22 of saying, well, we need the evidence. Now, there's not that many housing officers that can get a phone call to say they're doing it right this second, come and essentially have a smell immediately. The same with the police to actually do anything about it. So you've got these logs, you've got one person saying, well, I'm not doing that, or it's not me, it's someone else. You've got the police saying, well, we can spot check when we have the availability. The Safer Neighbourhoods team can do what they can do. But again, they're so stretched. So you've got some people being frustrated. And I almost wonder whether some people go, well, if I just say this, it'll make it worse and it'll get the action done quicker. But again, everything's so stretched that it's just impossible to deal with, and what's the truth and what's not the truth as well as part of it.
Yeah, those cases are very, very complex, you know, in terms of cannabis, use of cannabis, what is there available, what can you do in terms of tools and powers, and it is a partnership approach, 100%. But I also think around what advice we give to those individuals experiencing any sort of ASB in terms of, and I'm not a great fan about diary sheets, but they're really important at the same time. You know, in the sense of what time did it happen? How did it make you feel? You know, how many people were out there? Who was out there? It's like collating that data. And housing officers and police can't be there at the beck and call, unfortunately. But I think there are tools and powers and there are warnings. And, you know, I feel that there are various approaches that you can take to case management. First of all, the initial stages, for example, you know, sometimes it baffles me that when a victim continues to report incidents of antisocial behaviour, the perpetrator hasn't been spoken to or they've been written to. So that nobody's knocked on the door and it's been a paper exercise. So I think it's really important that that somebody knocks on that door, really listens to what they're saying, gives them the tools to record information and type the incident, what time it's happened, what impact has it had on them, and then those diary sheets are collected and they're analysed. There are tools and powers that are available. So, for example, it might be a warning letter, it might be a community protection warning, leading to a notice about cannabis, about smell, about the impact, and so, you know, from that perspective, we know we have to have good evidence. We know it's civil legislation, so in and around that, if it's about how you broaden your investigation. Are the neighbours telling you that they can smell the cannabis, or associate ASB regards to that, and then really kind of broadening your investigation as much as you can, so then you're able to use that legislation on the balance of probabilities. So I think that's what the use of the civil legislation is. You know, in terms of the police, they'll say it's got to be beyond reasonable doubt, got a criminal standard of proof. Yeah. And as a housing officer, you know, you've got balance of probabilities. If you've got 3 people on the street saying this is what's happening, this is the impact, and you've got good statements, and you've got a police officer writing their statements as well, you can rock up to the court and ask for an injunction, you know, to curb some of those behaviours. And I totally get that. It's tied in financial restrictions, it's budgets, it's the legal system. But nevertheless, I think it's as long as the housing officer does as much as they can to gather the information, broaden their investigation, gather as much evidence as they can to really help proceed with some of those difficult cases.
Yeah, no, certainly, and it's that, as I say, that balance between everything, and there is always that concern, isn't there, of saying, well, the financial costs of having to go through the legal process, getting solicitors involved, getting to the court. I mean, the courts, as we know, are so backed up right now, and they have been for what feels like a long time, and I think that probably adds to everything and just raises that escalation in something that's a really emotive point for everyone, and even not just the victims and the perpetrators, which is something actually I want to touch on as well in regards to the language used. There's been some discussion, hasn't there, about should you still be using, or should we in general be using victim perpetrator? Should it be subject of report? Should it have been reportee? And sort of, do you feel make a difference to people? Do people like being known as a victim, or should it be termed in a different way? Does that have an impact as well, potentially?
Oh, I think that's a good question. I'm double-minded about that. I think, in terms of when you're a victim of antisocial behaviour, does it really matter if you're called a victim or a reporter? You know, it's what happens, you know, in terms of the receiving end of a service. I don't know what you do. What do you think?
Well, I just think about cases where there's culpability on both sides. You know, you've got 2 neighbours that are sort of rubbing each other up the wrong way. Yeah. Who's the victim, who's the perpetrator in those. But then to use the term subject of report and reporter, it just sounds too removed and it's sort of inaccessible jargon rather than something describing, you know, what the two parties are actually doing. It's really difficult. I don't have a yes, it should be this answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, because I think for housing officers, the most difficult thing is for them, they've been in, they've spoken to the victim and they've told them that, this is the impact, this is how bad it is. And then they record everything, and in their mind they've got what course of action they're going to take. And then they go across and they speak to the alleged perpetrator, and they will equally tell you a story which is counter allegations made against the victim, and those are the most difficult type of case. And this is where the reporter or subject reporter, that's for me, I can't get my head around that on the basis. But I think that what's really important in those kind of cases as well is that you remain neutral, because it's quite easy for the victim then feel that the housing officer is taking sides. And when I've been involved in some of those cases, you get a different case officer working on one side and another case officer working on the other case. But I think if you're a professional and you know what you're doing and you work well with those individuals and they are, and you treat them both equally, and you go on the basis of the evidence that you have and the information that you have, then your professional, in terms of your professional curiosity, is going to take you a long way to really determine the course of action. And actually, you're not the judge and jury. Take the information from the perpetrator and the victim and proceed with the case. Get your evidence together and put it in front of a judge. Let them decide whether it's a 50-50 case or is it a clear cut in who the victim and who the perpetrator is.
No, certainly, and that's some cases that I've experienced, and some spring to mind where they were so long-standing and ongoing, and you'd have sort of 3 or 4 housing officers that would switch between the case because simply there was so many complaints made about one party or the other, and they'd say that the housing officer was not being fair and there was a bias, and it would be switched, and it gets so muddied in the water. And as you say, then you're looking at the case management, the notes, case management systems sometimes aren't the easiest, as I'm sure a lot of people are very aware, to try and use and try and record something in a way that can be done that doesn't just simply, for want of a better term, add on to the load of the housing officer. There's not that many people that I know of that are agile working and can do it there and then on site and things. So you've got all of these things against you. You've got some very time-heavy phone calls, visits, and it just kind of can make it go on for so long, and it just feels like such a big thing that sometimes, do people lose that perspective of actually it's not my, like I'm dealing with it, but it's not my home life, it's this person's, and it gets to that point of it's causing so much issue to them, it's impacting you, and to take that professional stance to it is really difficult on sometimes.
You make a good point around recording information in databases and recording systems. I think it's so important that housing officers record every single conversation that they have, with the victim and the alleged perpetrator, because I've been in lots of situations in my housing days where some cases have gone to the ombudsman, and I know that officer has worked so hard working with that individual, trying to pull all stops to stop and support that individual, stop the ASB and support the individual, and then lands the ombudsman report asking for further information, and you go and look onto the database system and that information is missing. Crucial information is missing because if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So I think that's a really key pointer, I would say. It's really important to record the information. And also, if you haven't taken certain action, why you didn't take certain action. Because some of those cases of those individuals are really vulnerable. They've got mental health issues. There's lots that go on with those individuals that are experiencing antisocial behaviour, and some that are also, perpetrators have their own safeguarding issues too.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think this kind of reminds me of I'd sit and fill in case notes, and you'd get pages and pages and pages, and sometimes the system would throw it out and you'd sit there and you think, I've just filled in something. Is there anything, and I don't know if it's something that you've ever sort of experienced, John, or any sort of tips, have you experienced anything over your careers of any kind of these are good things to include. So do you do a bullet point of, this is my phone call, these are the main points, or do you have to go to the level of, I said hi, she said hi, I'm feeling this. Obviously, there's certain parts, but is there what's your, say, top 3 points that should be included? Should it always be every single word that was said, or should it just be the main body of it?
I'm going to let you come in on it because you're a data person, be more concise.
I think with any data, you've got to think, well, somebody's going to be looking at this. What's going to convey the best information in the shortest sort of space? So I would err on the sort of notes aspect of it. Got the idea of contemporaneous notes being something that's admissible in court evidence. I don't think you need a transcription of exactly what was said, as long as you capture the gist of it, the main points, I think. I think the other thing to bear in mind is that you need to use the right fields, the right places, record the information in the right places on your database as well, so it's not sort of higgledy-piggledy. Somebody uses one box for one thing and somebody uses it for something else. So if you're taking a whole load of data off the database, that you can actually use it to analyse and try and make sense of. A lot of the time you're going to be reading through notes and categorising it, or making some kind of quantitative judgment about what data is in there. So I think it's really important to bear that in mind when you're recording information about a case.
And I would just add to that in terms of exactly what John says there, but the harm. I think it's really important to say how that individual was feeling, what the impact there was on that individual, because I think if you know the harm, seeing the impact of that individual, I think your actions will relate to that in terms of what support do they need, rather than, it's a noise nuisance, I need to get environmental health services involved, I need to do X, Y, Z, I need to use this piece of legislation, but it's about the harm and the impact that behaviour is having on that individual, and what other services do I need to bring to the table to help them, because that way they're going to be able to manage their own safeguarding issues potentially, or directed to some additional support. And there are other methods as well. So I think just around what support you've offered as well within those notes, and obviously as we've said, type what's happened, what conversations been had, but not too wordy, but succinct, to the point, really.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So just thinking about, like, if a case does go to court, there'll be sort of quantifying what happened in a case. At 10 p.m. on the 28th, the alleged perpetrator did this, and it made their neighbour feel like that. Yes. And then on the 29th at 11:30 p.m, and you can just create this sort of timeline of incidents going forward over time that you can actually build into a case that's put before a judge, and they can take all that into account. And without those kind of notes, without the kind of times and the feelings, it's going to be really difficult to create that kind of impression on a judge to make that decision that goes in the victim's favour.
Yeah, I'll help you write your statement as well. Yeah,
it's almost like you need to create the so what, don't you? You need they were playing music at 11 o'clock at night, but if the house is in the middle of nowhere with no one around, well, so what? But if you're in a street, and you've got lots of elderly people, young children, families, people with mental health issues themselves, well, that's so what is the impact, and then going forward, and just sort of bringing it back. We're coming into the season, aren't we? You've got the ASB, the summer, you've got the bank holidays, you've got festivals. We're obviously coming to the football. We know that football tends to do a lot in regards to people's emotions. People get more involved. People are out celebrating, commiserating. You've got the stats around domestic violence around football. That tends to go up 28%, I believe, when there's a match played. I think it's 38% when a team loses. So you've got all of this pressure coming at this time of year. Do you think that as well, because of the holidays and you tend to get more staff on holiday, does that create more of there's a lot more cases to report? Does it create more pressure? Is it worse in the summer because there's more of it and there's less people to deal with it, or is it just heightened anyway?
Ooh.
Well, I'm just thinking about the seasonality.
Seasonality.
I mean, we've been looking at that for over a long period of time. When we used to just have quarterly data, we knew that quarter two, the kind of summer quarter, was the main focus of antisocial behaviour. It's quite interesting if you talk to police officers and they say, well, no, it's around November the 5th, it's fireworks night, that's the worst for us. But housing people are like, no, it's definitely the summer. But what we see kind of drives that up is not necessarily the hot weather or the holidays. It's a combination of all of those things that then go to create that. But if there are people on holiday, housing officers are not at work, we tend to see a drop in caseloads reported through our data systems. So you will see over August there'd be less than you get in July, even though you think, well, it's the school summer holidays in August. And then we'll see like a big rise in September as all the cases start getting put onto the systems and landlords start recording them. So you've got the two elements of it. You've got the ASB actually occurring, and then you've got the landlord's ability to record it as well. We see a similar dip in December when there are fewer working days. So you might sort of think, well, Christmas and New Year celebrations, there's going to be sort of more people at home, more people celebrating, more noise, etc., etc. But no, you actually see a drop then because there's fewer people working to actually put it onto a computer.
Oh, that's a valid point. Okay, yeah. I think definitely seasonal reporting does occur, across the board. We do find, obviously, when lighter nights, you'll get the young people playing outside. There'll be more people in the parks. And sometimes it's a perception issue as well, and that whole thing around, there's lots of people celebrating the football win, or, kids are just playing football. Oh my God. The young people out on the street, the perception that they're all causing antisocial behaviour. But actually, that's subjective as well. Whereas, you might go past a winning team and say, well, brilliant, congratulations, excellent, and you might cheer with them. And you'll get another individual going past saying, oh my God, there's lots of ASB, or they're all drinking, they're all allowed, and I'm really frightened, and now I'm not going to walk to a local shop, ASB's getting really bad. So I think it is in the eye of the beholder from that perspective. Going back to your point, seasonal issues do affect, and particularly on estates and communities where, people will be out and about, some just totally enjoying the sunshine, and getting on, and some individuals will create and will get involved in antisocial behaviour. Particularly young people who've got nothing else to do, they're bored. There's peer pressure, group mentality. That can be an actual cause of ASB, but also sometimes it's just the perception of young people just are causing ASB, which is not always fact.
Yeah, just because they're outside in a group doesn't mean that they're doing anything that's wrong. But it kind of goes back to that generational thing as well, doesn't it? As well, potentially that because some people maybe have been raised to be a certain way when they were younger, or they didn't have the access to things that youth have today. It looks really bad to them, and it comes into that they feel that they're being intimidated, but actually there was not anything even remotely suggested towards them, but yet still there's the reports, and that's where it comes again, tends to come to the housing, maybe sometimes the police, or that joint working group of kind of looking at it and going, well, just because they were all on the corner and they were maybe being a bit loud, having a joke, having a laugh, doesn't mean that they were actually, they weren't staring at you, they weren't trying to make you walk on the other side of the road. You felt you had to do that. And it's having that balanced, that balanced discussion sometimes with people, isn't it? And
absolutely. I think media plays a lot of part in all that as well, in terms of, football, and all you see on TV is, the losing team breaking that into a fight, or the winning team overly celebrating, and then there's that whole issue around, oh my God, there's so much ASB, and, is it ASB, or is it just, a group of individuals getting together, enjoying the win. But I think there are some serious issues right beneath all of that as well, you know, in terms of how that behaviour can escalate, you know, into ASB, into criminal activity, and often you see a lot of that in city centres as well. I'm not sure, from my experience, that you see that on housing estates and such, you know, but I think you know, it could filter into housing estate. I don't know. Do
well, I
you
was just thinking, at what point does order become disorder?
Disorder, exactly.
So I think in London a few weeks ago there was a whole load of youths that went into an M&S and just like sort of was doing mass shoplifting. In you know, was that disorder or was it order because they'd planned to go shoplifting and there was like a whole group of them that decided to go in there? It was obviously criminal behaviour because they were shoplifting, but when they came out and started running away, was that antisocial? It's really difficult to sort of draw that line. But certainly, when I've been working at local authorities looking at hotspots, the hotspots are much more around the kind of town centre issues. I remember one town centre incident. It was a man with a scaffold pole, like just kind of intimidating people in the street. And this sort of thing, you know, could happen on a housing estate, but there'd be fewer people walking around to intimidate with a scaffold pole, for example.
It reminds me of a story which was on an estate, and it was on bonfire night. And again, residents annually, they'd created a bonfire and they'd sort of discussed between themselves, and all the furniture came out, obviously all the home improvements, all the, you know, fireplaces, the wood surrounds, and it all got piled up. And the call came in to us to say, it's next to a play area, there's all this stuff being piled up. And it was a case of, it's not just tenants doing it, it's private residents, it's a lot of people doing it. We can't really deal with it. The local council were kind of going, well, we can't really deal with it, ring the fire brigade. And I was being sort of sent from pillar to post. And I spoke to the local neighbourhood safety team, who I had a really great connection with, and we used to spend a lot of time doing estate walkabouts and things, which was always great. And it was a case of, well, we'll be aware of it. And they were actually out then that night dealing with another incident. And a bit like you say, on bonfire night, they were dealing with quite a serious overdose, and there were youths then setting fireworks off at the police officers that were just there trying to sort of keep people away from the emergency services. So you've got this, they do it all the time. They might do it all the time in regards to have a bonfire, but actually it affects other people. And then you've got the police dealing with another situation, and unfortunately a very small minority of people go, well, I'm going to do this now. And the next morning I came into the police saying, you need to go on a joint visit with us, speak to this tenant, because their son, you know, this 13 and 14-year-old decided it was funny to let fireworks off, which not only dangerous for the police, it's dangerous for other people involved. And it was just a difficult thing to have to deal with.
It is. I mean, it's unruly behaviour, isn't it? And criminality. There's just sometimes there is, as a housing officer, what control do you even have? Their idea was, let's get all the rubbish together, let's burn it, clean our estate. That might be their vision. You know, but actually the consequences of fire services, you know, in terms of having to turn up potentially next to a children's playground, and all the other authorities trying to manage the situation, and they then get attacked. You know, it's really worrying that, you know, sometimes when situations like that do arise in our communities. But I think for managing an estate with all those big issues, you know, it really we need to go to the roots of the issues. And I mean, do we know as a housing officer who is on our patch? And when I had my housing patch, I knew who lived on that housing patch, you know, because I'd do rent collection, you know, I'd go and check out the repairs, and you know, rotten window was checked with a little key, and yes, you can have a new window, you know, but that, as expert as that gets, you know. And then you've got, oh my God, you've got ASB. I've had no training. I've not been told what to do. I don't know what tools and powers to use, and what am I going to say to this individual now? But it's massive. You know, I've had officers come back to the office and cry and say, I can't believe that the impact of the antisocial behaviour is having on that individual. Actually, they can't stand up in the kitchen because they're crawling around, because as soon as they stand up, the neighbour sees them in the kitchen, and then the abuse starts and stones are thrown at the window. So you could deal with complex cases like that. But just going back to the point of do you know your estate? Do you know your patch? It's impossible sometimes, because housing associations in particular don't necessarily work in the area. They may visit, they may have surgeries. They'll know the individuals by name, the tenants by name. But from going back to days of walking the patch, and Beth waiting for me to go past, offering me a cup of tea and a homemade cake, were the days to live for, because that was real community cohesion. And she'd say, do you know up there, those kids are getting out of hand, or so and so they did this. So you get your intel a lot from within the community. But nowadays, you don't know who your neighbour is. That community cohesion's kind of gone in some areas, and you walk down your path and you shut your door and you don't see anyone else on that estate. And that could be various reasons. You have those areas that really where the housing officers, the police, the council, do street tidy ups, and you have that kind of whole community cohesion. Collective working with a community perspective, and then in other areas where people are frightened to leave the front door, and if they are seen to be speaking to any of the professionals, they fear of reprisals. So there are different types of estates that housing officers have to really contend with and work with, and try to deliver an ASB service as well, and a wider housing service.
And I think we've seen that in some of the things we do, and when we speak to different landlords and we look at things for ASB and helping with statistics and figures, the ones that do a lot of community-based approach, so whether it's they organise events frequently for estates, or they organise for the walkabouts, or they organise those services to come together to be that local voice for people. So you don't want to be driving to an office that's out of the way. You don't want to be calling someone on the phone where you can't really express exactly what's going on, because sometimes you need them to come and see and feel that. And sort of, I think it's going to touch on something that we're looking at doing in the future with the future of housing. And all of the services are so stretched to what they can do, and housing officers say usually don't have the specialist training, but they're picking up things that are mental health, maybe something that's more local authority, maybe talking about things that are environmentally affecting them, which, yes, it is to do with the landlord, but also you've got the council involved and you've got all these different branches, and something I think going forward that we'll be looking more into, won't we, John, from what we've been discussing recently?
Yeah, so with the Housing Futures network group of housing associations, we're really going to be investigating where those gaps are. So where the public service kind of doesn't have the resources or capacity or willpower to actually get involved in these complex cases, how much are housing officers having to cover? Where are the things, and then where does it go? Landlords, they've got regulated rent, they've only got so much they can do. They're there to sort of keep tenants in the property and maintain them. How much extra stuff should they be doing? What is the social part of being a social landlord? So we're going to be doing some research into that over the summer, but it's a really complex area, and it's very difficult to know what the answer is if it's not just more money.
Yeah. Do you know, some of the examples that I have when I was kind of more frontline was it's got to be a multi-agency response. Whereas an example of that would be, you get your housing association there, you get your local authority housing there, and you'd get your police, your environmental health services, children's social services, education, a job centre, all of those people coming together of a day of action, a week of action, so that where we'd have local briefings, on-street briefings. So you'd get, on-street briefings, and it will be, clear out this area. There's issues around antisocial being in that particular cul-de-sac, and just really looking at the issue, looking at the data, looking at the issues, looking at the problems, speaking to the residents, and then coming together and really coming in as force. And the impact of that, you'll get people, residents, looking through the windows, the curtain shifting, seeing what's going on. And then you'll get some people that'll come out and say, wow, this is great, because then it's a clean sweep, if you like, of offering advice, offering support, offering opportunities, cleaning, and around looking at the issues around wiping off graffiti. So it's that, and you might say that's not new money. That's money better used and better coordinated, because that's their day job. That's what they do. But coming together as a collective has a more of a dynamic approach. Also for the residents to think they're coordinated. It's a real, everyone's working together as a partnership. There's no silos, So I think that's a really good model of kind of really grassrooted and really sort of working with that community, them feeling cared for. Because sometimes you will get estates where they feel no one cares, police won't come on because they won't deal with the perpetrators effectively, so I'm not going to report it.
Yeah.
No point me reporting antisocial behaviour because nothing will be done. And I don't really know who to report it to either, so I'll just leave it. So it's that defeated, situation that victims may find themselves in. And not even victims, just generally someone on the estate feeling that what's the point?
Yeah.
And that's where you've got the futures, projects, and your approach will really matter.
No, definitely. I'm going to round it up now with over the next 12 months. This is for both of you. What sort of 3 things that you both want to see in the area of ASB, whether it's negative or positive, but what are 3 things over the next 12 months that you can sort of 12 months time look back on and think yes or no, that's happened. So just put you on the spot there with those ones.
I mean, I'd like to see landlords record ASB more accurately. That's the main thing. I'd like to see the evidence being kept in a better way so that it helps victims. And I'd also like to see some kind of policy shift from the government or other agencies to give landlords a better framework to be able to define ASB and use their professional judgment to decide whether it is occurring and what harm is happening for the victims.
Okay.
Yeah, lovely. I think for me, coming from a victim's charity perspective, I just want their voice, I want the victim's voice to be really strong. And I want everyone to know about the ASB Case Review, which is a statutory right for victims of antisocial behaviour to use if they feel that their antisocial behaviour hasn't been dealt with effectively. So to really take up that, and we're doing a lot of work to really get as many victims to know about the ASB Case Review. And fundamentally, I think I'm quite keen to see how the Crime and Policing Act comes into force with a range of tools and powers. So we have the Respect Order, which will deal with a repeat, persistent and ongoing ASB. So we'll be really keen to see how that pans out. There'll be some pilots regards to that. We know housing associations now can apply for closure orders in their own right. So I think that's a really great tool. Again, data recording, I think that will be an element within that. And cuckooing. So the third would be the Crime and Policing Act, to see what that brings to the table.
No, brilliant. No, that's great. So we'll see what happens in 12 months then.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today on this episode of Housing Data Talks, which covered ASB. I'm going to thank my guests again, Harvinder Saimbhi and John Wickenden from Housemark, for sharing their thoughts on ASB. Please have a look at our website, which is housemark.co.uk. Have a look at all the information that we've got on there. Lots of information on ASB. If you want to contact us in regards to any consultancy work, please get in touch with the team, again, all on the website. Look at our LinkedIn page. Lots of really great, useful information that we share on LinkedIn, some access to reports, and also please like and follow us on YouTube for this video of Housemark and our Housing Data Talks podcast as well. The more subscribers and the more viewers, the more things that we can do and bring you in the future. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.